But with the second chapter of my research, I used a lot of the. I actually used the historic Fish and Wildlife Service harvest survey age ratios for these four populations, and I related those to different habitat and climate and ecological variables to see what's actually driving trends in recruitment over time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found with that research was, it's quite different across these four species, and it tells us a lot about the ecology of each, and also the ranges that they breed in, because they're all distinct. They all kind of have four different areas in North America that they breed, these eastern populations. So, for example, for surf scoters, they primarily breed east of Hudson Bay, kind of further south in the kind of the center of the boreal forest in Quebec is kind of the core of their breeding range. And then whereas black scoters and white-winged scoters are on the west side of the Hudson Bay, the white-winged scoters are a little bit further inland along the Canadian Shield, and then whereas black scoters are a little bit further south and a little bit closer to Hudson Bay. And then long-tailed ducks are up in the tundra, so they're further north into Nunavut. So they're all kind of distinct habitats, distinct ranges. And with that, what I was able to find is that there's also different things driving recruitment. So with surf scoters, for example, something that I found that was really interesting was that what their populations seem to really be driven by is what's happening in the predator community and predation. So in the boreal forest, you have small mammal populations, so voles and lemmings, and they run on 4-year cycles.
And what is a lemming? Is it a type of a weasel or?
It's a little rodent, so it's like a kind of a mouse size, so a really small mammal.
Gotcha.
But it's a prey base for all these predators. So your foxes and skunks and weasels and things along those lines. But they have these 4-year cycles where they peak and then they crash. And that at these and so what happens with that? So I used kind of as a proxy for what these crashes are. There's great gray owls, which is a big owl that lives in the boreal forest. They actually, in years where there's these rodent population crashes, they'll migrate south in huge numbers, and they'll go into areas where they're not usually seen. And so what I was able to use is I used some data that showed when these eruptions would happen. And so then I was able to use that as sort of a proxy for what's happening with the small mammal population. What I found was that tying this back into surf scoters is that years where there was these small mammal crashes, though the surf scoter recruitment dropped significantly. And the key reason for that is that when you have no small mammals on the landscape, all these predators need something else to eat. So they start looking for sea duck nests. And that has big consequences for surf scoters, because finding duck nests is difficult for predators. They're well hidden. They're in, sea ducks, they like to breed in these kind of like close to ponds, and they like using like islands and things like that in these kind of larger wetlands and lakes. But so they much prefer to hunt these small mammals because they're kind of everywhere. And whereas duck nests are kind of more scattered and more rare to find. But when you don't have this abundance of other prey, then they're really focusing on they'll start hunting nests more. And so that's kind of what I found, which was really interesting to kind of show what's happening in that ecosystem, all these different connections, tying together what's happening with a totally different prey species.
Do they know what's causing the rodent crash?
Sure. So they just go through this kind of cycle where they have this abundance, and a lot of it's actually an interplay with the predators. So there's kind of this classic example in ecology of lynxes and hares. So lynx they have these population cycles where basically like if you have a bunch of hares on the landscape, then you'll have really good recruitment of more lynx. So because there's so much prey out there, so they do really well. But then with being so many lynx out there, they're eating all the hares. So then you lose all your hares, and then the next year there's no food for the lynx. So then the lynx population crashes. Well, then with no lynx around, then the hares go back up.
Yeah. Okay.
So that kind of goes up, and that they go on a pretty consistent cycle. And this happens a lot. It happens with grouse. It happens again on the prairies as well, to some extent with small mammals as well. But so they go through these cycles, and it's that predator prey interaction that's driving that. It also has to do a little bit with food resources and just the amount of young that they can support. Like they go through these fluctuations over time. So it's complicated, but generally that's kind of why it's just kind of a function of population ecology, where you have these booms.
Thank you for watching this clip from the North American Waterfowler Podcast. Make sure and subscribe. If you want to see the full episode of this podcast, go to the description where you can click the link. And as always, starting up September, I will be posting all of my waterfowl hunting videos for this coming hunting season.